this computer. All right. So good times. Um, y'all actually did really well. Those of you who took the Kahoot. Um, I'm actually going to have probably a couple that I'll give you since we'll be um, gone. Okay. I want to see anybody in the sphere. So, yes, I don't care who it is. That would be very cool. All right. Um, one of the questions that almost everyone got wrong, so don't feel bad if your name is on this or if you're because almost everyone got this one wrong, and we're going to talk about it. Um, all of the following are part of the 8 dimensions of wellness. Now, no, we have not talked about wellness. We have not talked about these 8 dimensions of wellness. Um, it is part of, one of the things they talk about in the test. Um, but let's talk about how you could figure out a question even if you have no clue. So, this is what dimensions of wellness. What kind of things do you need to keep well? You need good financials, you need good smarts, uh, good social stuff. Do you need illness to stay well?
Mm, I would say
So that's how, I know it seems silly. But that's the way I would look at this question. Um, this was another one. When choosing your risk factor, you need to analyze the importance of it and the. So one of the things that what they're talking about is if you have done all your assessment, your first step of your spiff, right? Done all your assessment, and you're like, okay, I've got like 3 problems here that I got to figure out. Which one, which risk factor, which problem am I going to pick? And one of the ways you pick that is by saying which one can be changed easily. Um, it's like if I looked at my house and I said, I need to clean it, I need to paint it, and I need to move it to a new location. Well, which one of those am I going to pick first? Probably clean it, right? Because that's the easiest to change. That's what they're talking about here. Does that make sense?
That's a hard question.
It is.
When you're
But
choosing your risk factor, like the risk factor you're going to focus, like what's the
yes.
you're
So
going to.
let's say we did our assessment and we found our risk factors to be um, parents don't know how to talk to their kids. Um, laws make it easy to get drugs, alcohol, whatever. And the schools have an alcohol policy. I don't know, making something up. Of those, which one do we decide to do first? Well, it's probably easiest to educate parents. Laws take a while, right? We can still work on that, but that's not going to be as easily changeable as just educating parents. It's basically talking about how you set yourself up for success. So you want to look at how easily can something change? Does that make sense? I know it's one of those funky ones, but that's why we're talking about it. Um, oh, that's a whole other. Did I give the? Oh, that's funny. That was the last question. I used that for a different class. So, anyways, um, oh, and I closed it out. I can't remember who had the highest score, but there will be a small prize. Um, and like I said, I'll send you guys 2 this week. Um, it will probably be, the only thing I don't like about Kahoot is it logs you out so easy. Um, I haven't done the coalitions one yet, have I? I don't think so. So we'll do the coalitions one and then one other one. Um, but there you go. All right. So looking at what we're going to talk about today, we looked last week at the kind of overall coalitions. What is a coalition? The overall CADCA primer. Now we're going to start with the different, going through the different phases of the SPIF. So today we're just doing the assessment and capacity. And one thing I say this, and you've probably heard me say it 15 times, I'm going to say it again. When it says community assessment, remember that community is how you define it. Community can be a classroom, a school, a neighborhood, a city, or a county. So I think a lot of times when people think of community assessment, you think, oh my gosh, it's that big, huge thing. But community, you may be doing the spiff with your classroom that you're working with, and that's a community. All right. So what do we do with the assessment phase of assessing the needs? That's where we collect the data. You're collecting all kinds of data, whatever it is. Every community is going to be a little bit different. It might be archival data from things in the past. It may be surveys. It may be, observations, maybe environmental scans, whatever you need to do to figure out what the problems, resources, and readiness is. What does readiness mean? I know we've talked about this.
That that they're able to implement it, or they have some things in place.
A little bit before that, even. So Amanda says, is the
The
community ready?
mindset, they have the
Yeah.
right mindset.
Yep. Yep. Do they even think it's a problem and are they ready to make a change? So you can think of readiness. Um, a lot of times we'll think about, the stages of change for an individual, like pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparing, all that. Um, readiness in a community is, does the community even think it's a problem? And are they ready to do something about it? We need to know, why do we need to know that early on?
So that you don't invest a whole bunch into something and people really don't see it as an issue,
Yeah.
or they have an interest in addressing it.
So let's just say I went out into my community and I found out that we have an ABC spider that's everywhere.
Mm.
Nobody knows about this because they're all hiding in bushes. So nobody really cares. Nobody sees any damage from these ABC spiders. Readiness is going to be low. So, what would be some of the things we would want to start off with? Do we want to go in and tell everyone we're going to spray for these spiders everywhere?
I don't know. I don't know if you want to do a community meeting and invite people there, and see who all sees it as a problem.
And just educate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you start saying we're going to go through and spray everybody's bushes, wait, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Um, so same thing when we're looking at drugs and alcohol, when we're looking at suicide prevention, violence prevention, any of that. We want to see if the community sees that as a problem. If not, we need to educate to show what's going on. So that was just a small little tangent, but I've seen a lot of practice test questions about that. So within this needs assessment, we define and describe the community because again, community might be, good morning, Miss Tiffany. The community might be you know, in one neighborhood. It might be a county, it might be, whatever. So let the community decide who they want to consider. I know, like for myself in Mason, um, I don't technically live in Mason, I live in Deerfield Township, but the infrastructure and the schools and um, the shopping and all of that is kind of all one. So in our area, we would define it as Mason Deerfield Township. Some places might say, nope, city limits. So one of the things we have to do is listen to the community and what do they define the community as. Then you collect information on what are the needs and resources we have. Do we have people who are already working on the problems? Do we have um, do we have people who are already together in a group doing some things that we can um, work with? So I'm working with someone who's doing the Suicide Prevention Coalition for Warren County, and there is a Veterans Suicide Coalition. So you better believe they're working together. They figured out who some of the resources already were and said, hey, let's work together. Um, then number three kind of goes back to that question that we had, conduct a problem analysis for each substance. So looking at all of our substances or all of our issues and what does the problem look like for each of those. And that'll include changeability. That'll include how bad is it in the community. So I may see these ABC spiders in all the bushes, and they may be destroying homes. So the problem is really high, right? Or it may just be that they just look funky at night if you're walking by them. The problem is low. Um, Now, in reality, I would not do number four because creating a logic model can be a lot of work. I
Mm.
would just pick it on the one that we're going to work on. But there's not going to be a question about this. But the next thing you do is look at a logic model. And then they always talk about, updating this community assessment because that they say about every 2 to 3 years because things change. I mean, we know how much changed from 2019 to 2021.
Mm.
A lot changes. You could have a huge um, place that employs a lot of people leave, and a year later, there's going to be huge changes. So it's always important to update that. So community assessment, we're going to look at doing all of these things. And remember what I said back in the day, we were supposed to just jump into implement. Can you imagine? Um, we didn't get things done as well. All right. One of the words that they use a lot is work group. You're going to see that word on the test. And in fact, this page is one of the ones that they've chosen to have a test question from. So when you see work group, just think like a subcommittee. So you've got your whole coalition and you might have a community assessment work group. So you have a work group who is going to collect and get all of that data. Work group, subcommittee, small section, whatever you want to call it. But you're going to see that word a lot. So put any word in front of work group, and that's what that work group is supposed to do. So the community assessment work group is the one that's supposed to collect, analyze, and report on the data. They talk about who could be involved in that, and really they list some people, but there's so many people that you could have involved in that. Um, you know, I would say they don't list it, but I would say even maybe depending on what your community's like, if your community has a lot of um, faith houses, maybe somebody from the faith community. Um, if your community has a huge employer, like we have a big P&G uh, business center down the street, might want to get someone from there in it because they might have really good access to data. So these are don't worry about memorizing who should be involved. Just knowing that a work group is a subgroup of a coalition that works on whatever it is in front of that work group. Um, they might also be starting the evaluation process. Why would you start looking at evaluation when you're just assessing?
Because you want
To make,
sense. Go on.
I was just saying to make sure you're measuring the right thing or what the impact or the outcome
Mhm.
Yeah, because
to
you
be able to
can't
identify it.
evaluate something at the end if you haven't figured it out at the beginning.
Right.
Now, there may be some things you evaluate at the end that don't need to have known, but if we get to the end of our grant and we want to figure out um, how did the underage drinking arrests increase or decrease, well, if we don't know what they were at the beginning, we're not going to be able to know if there was any change. So you do have to start kind of thinking about that. You may not know everything that you're going to do, but the more data you have, you'll have access to some of those things. Um, you know, this is also maybe the group that might say, hey, community, I know you're not ready to talk about this, but let's educate you on some of the problems that are going on. And there's lots of different ways that you could do that. Through social media, through a town hall, through um, you know, commercials on TV. And then they're also the people who might tie into, okay, what are the specific things we're going to look at? Because the work group has that data. Now, this is a perfect world situation that you've got a coalition with sub work groups. We know sometimes it's the whole coalition. And in reality, that's the way it is for most places. But know that what they're talking about when they say a work group is just a small section of the coalition that's working on something. Because you can have um, maybe you come up with 3 risk factors and you can have a work group on each one of those risk factors. Any questions on the work group issue? All right. So these next few slides are kind of intense, but um, and again, you're not going to have to fill out something. It's all multiple choice. But I like the visual that they use. It is in the booklet, um, the community assessment booklet, and um, we're going to analyze each part of this. Um, but let's imagine that you are looking at the data. I'm just going to give you an overview, then we're going to go through each section of this. So you're looking at the data, and some of the things that come up are, gosh, there were a lot of discipline cases at the school about alcohol. And holy macaroni, we had a huge arrest of DUIs for minors, or there was a lot of teen pregnancy, or a lot of juveniles got in trouble for alcohol. Oh, all of this data that we're seeing right now goes to underage drinking, right? You may have another tree with all kinds of other data, but these are some of the things that we're seeing. So then we look at, okay, what does underage drinking look like specifically? These are all it's kind of like what you can see, and then let's figure out, go down deeper. So now that we've looked at all this, what do the teens say about their drinking? Well, 58% of them say that they had alcohol in the last 30 days. 10% of them said they binge drank. Or no, that's 21%. Sorry. Um, we've even got 27% of sixth graders who said they've already tried alcohol. Okay, so we're seeing now maybe why this tree grew up the way it did. But now let's look even further down into the root causes. Why is this happening? And this is where you'll get some of those risk factors of people not carding, people using fake IDs, of people having their friends buy them something. Um, so so let's get a little bit more into these, but in general, that's kind of what this tree is. So again, looking at you've just collected tons of data about your community. And maybe you take the data and you kind of clump it. So we've clumped all of the data that had to do with alcohol in one place. And holy cow, all of this data has to do with underage drinking, right? So that's why they then say the trunk of the tree is underage drinking. And then the question is, okay, how do we know this? Like why is this happening? So this is the what's happening. This is the but why. Why is it happening? So these things are happening because 12th graders are drinking. I mean, you're not going to have this happening if nobody's drinking, right? That 10th graders are binge drinking, sixth graders are having their first drink of alcohol. So just looking at above the ground, what would you say the problem is? It's, it's much more simple than you don't have to think much.
Sixth graders.
Kids are drinking,
Yeah.
just that simple. Um, yeah, teens drinking. It's just that's the problem. So when we want to create a problem statement, we can say underage drinking is a problem in X county, as evidenced by 58% of 12th graders reporting having alcohol in the last 30 days. In contrast, it's always good to kind of look at, what does the national average say of 16% and a state average of 30. So looking at these two averages, we're going to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, 58% is high. So that's our problem. Does that make sense how we got to there?
Mhm.
All right. So then the next question is, why is that a problem here in this county? And these are your root causes. Get it? Root. I know, I'm funny.
Okay.
So you might look at the data and the data might say, well, it's because we got all kinds of kids with all these fake IDs. Or it might be because we've got a lot of parents who are just hosting parties for their kids and taking keys and saying, well, at least they're drinking at home. Or you might have it that the community's like, you know what? Teens will be teens. They're going to drink. It's no big deal. This is where you really kind of dig in and say, why is this happening? Now, first of all, think about you could have 5 different communities with 5 different answers to this, right? And depending on what your answer is, will really depend on what you do. If we find out that that is the reason here in this community, that's going to be a totally different strategy that we're going to put into place than if it were merchants not carding. So think about 25 years ago when I started in prevention, we didn't do any of this. And we might have looked at teens drinking. And what would we probably have first done? Well, let's educate the teens on why they shouldn't be drinking. But we weren't getting to the root cause. So eventually we would, educate the teens enough, but it was a harder uphill battle than if we really dig in. Because now if we've decided, okay, this is what's really happening here is that parents believe that if I supervise them, I take their keys, it's going to be fine because DUIs are the only consequence of high risk drinking, right? Yeah, Martha says no. We know there's lots of consequences.
Mhm.
So this is how you can kind of start a logic model. Say underage drinking is a problem in X county, as evidenced by 58% of 12th graders reporting having had alcohol in the last 30 days, in contrast to the national average of 16 and the state average of 30. Okay, so that was our problem. But why? Well, it's because 84% of X county parents believe that supervised use of alcohol by teens will prevent DUIs. Okay, you can go even further. But why is that happening here? And maybe it's because parents just don't have the knowledge about how to talk to their kids about healthy decisions. So when we dig down even more, you can see what could our strategy be? If they lack the knowledge, we could give the knowledge, right? If they lack the knowledge to make healthy decisions, then we are going to provide education. Exactly. So do you see how we got there? Um, so again, we looked at all the data. The data is just kind of what you can see on the surface, figured out what that problem is, and then really looked at why is that problem happening here. Now, as far as test questions, um, there may be and it's not going to be a huge 3-page case study, but there might be a 3 or 4 sentence case study that talks about the problem, the why here, and then says pick the best strategy. So, if you were to look at this, you might say, let's do alcohol education in the schools. But now we know that if we are looking deep down into the root causes, we can do something that's going to really impact the root of the cause. Questions or discussions on that? So you can see how, this is the beginning of a logic model. Your next little section here would be, okay, what are we going to do? You could also include what resources do we have to do that? Because if we say that we're going to educate parents, maybe we have a parenting program that we're going to use, or we have $50,000 grant or whatever. Also, when you get to the very end, what would be the first thing? What would be the short-term goal we would want to happen?
Working, focusing on the parents, right?
So our short-term goal would be
Parents uh, being better educated to make better decisions.
right. Yes. We're not there yet, Thomas. We're not yet there yet. First thing we would want to do, like within that 3 to 6 month short-term goal guideline, is we want the parents to be better educated. The midterm goal, they call it some things middle goal, whatever, would be okay, now that the parents are educated, we want them to now believe that supervised use is not going to be the right way to do things. So we would say that this number would go down to maybe 50%. And then the long-term goal, which is, 3 to 5 years, would be the decrease in the last 30-day use. So why is it important to think about the short, middle, and long-term goals?
You want to kind of you want to monitor stuff gradually to see if there's any changes.
Yeah. So I told you guys we're replacing the column on our front porch, and we made a list of all the activities that we need to do. It makes us feel so much better when we can check off something. Oh, we painted. Yay, we can check that off. Oh, we made the U part of the column. We can check that off. Same thing's going to be true for this. If you get to where you are educating 500 parents and they learn something new, that's you can do that in 3 to 6 months. So that's going to be like, yes, okay, we did something, rather than waiting 3 to 5 years to see if the past
Mhm.
30-day use decreases. And also back to Martha's point, um, if you are trying to educate parents and nobody shows up, okay, maybe we need to look at this again. Maybe we need to figure out something else. Maybe we need to look at community readiness again, because maybe community readiness isn't there. All right. So they have this chart of words. Um, I think because some of us come from maybe the treatment side of life, or have looked at things in different ways, it's important to just look through these words. Um, so, in particular, root cause can be that risk factor, that protective factor. So, like when we were looking at our tree here, the root cause were these risk factors down here. Root cause might also be verbalized as the contributing factor. I've never seen it as a contributing factor, but in case you see that on the test, I've also never seen it as causal factor. Um, Intervening variables sometimes, but mostly I've seen it as the risk factor. So root cause, risk factor. Um, Objective is kind of what you want to do. These are different kinds of objectives. Um, and then strategy is just what are you going to do? You're going to do a program, you're going to do an activity, you're going to do an initiative, you're going to do whatever. Your strategy is what you're going to do. So, look over these. If you have questions about any of these words in particular, you can bring them, um, and we can talk about it.
So an exam question might just be, what's an example of this term? Or
No, a
this
question
is an
might be,
example. Is it data? Where does it fall?
so it might be that they use the term indicator in a question, and you just need to know that they're talking about data.
Okay, so it's just interchangeable language or vocabulary for us to be aware of.
Just
Got
like
it.
with work group. Who calls it a work group? Nobody calls it a work group.
I do think that Amy Hamilton calls it a work group because as she
Oh,
works for a
good. Maybe that's
coalition,
good.
we have now have
Good.
work groups in our coalition. So yes.
Okay, good.
So
Tiffany,
Jennifer,
yeah.
when like on the test, will it ask for like data is or something like that as far as when it comes to a definition, or will it be worded in a question as far as like a sentence like determining what it is? Did
It
I say
it
that
could do
right?
both. The main reason I want you to see this is they may say, um, your measure shows that 52% of teens are drinking. I'm saying don't be caught off guard by that term measure. It just means data.
Gotcha. I see what you're saying now. So just associate the words kind of gotcha.
Yes, good way to say it. Yep. Just associate those
Okay.
words together. Because
Thank
I know
you.
sometimes you might look at something and you're like, what the heck are they talking about with that word?
Correct. I got you.
All right, so that's our community assessment um, primer. Let's move into the capacity primer. So again, we got our little spiff. We did that needs assessment section. So now we're going to look at capacity. Capacity is just how do we figure out who and how we're going to put together and mobilize them to do something. Um, that's where you build your coalition. You figure out what your structure is going to be. You can figure out who's leading, um, maybe what training opportunities are going to be needed. Now, this primer, because it's a CADCA primer, um, relies very heavily on coalitions. I would also say in this capacity piece, it might be that you found out that there's a fabulous resource that nobody knows about. So we need to educate people on that resource. Or that you figured out that the teachers at the school don't realize that alcohol is a problem. So you educate the teachers. So building capacity, they focus very heavily on coalition piece of it, which to be fair is probably where the test is going to be mostly. But I just want you to understand that it's could be a lot of things, um, not just building and developing the coalition. And you're going to see this drug-free communities 50 million times because to CADCA and to ICNRC, it's important. So again, don't worry about memorizing all of the membership, but know that there needs to be people from lots of different sectors. Sector is their word. So lots of different pieces of the pie. Um, the different places are sectors. That would be your capacity. So building this up, saying, okay, I need to find someone, from a youth serving organization that can help me out. It's where you can go back to your assessment and say, um, you know, Johnny, we talked to Johnny and he works at a place that serves youth. Maybe we can ask him. So this is why there's that overlap too. Because in the capacity, you may go back and need some things for the assessment from the assessment. So this is just going to be brought up 50 million times. And if you tell me that there's nothing on the test about drug-free communities, I will fall over. Uh, I don't even know. I don't know that what I would say because I would be so surprised. All right. So after we get people, then we have to get some kind of structure. And this is something that it sometimes it's hard to wrap our brains around because this is a perfect world that they're talking about, and it's not the world that most places end up with. But in the perfect world, you've got members. So people who participate in the coalition, who come every week or month, you wouldn't do every week, I hope not. That they're the ones that do some of the work in the community. Then you have staff who are just there to help support and maybe provide some of the capacity. Maybe they're the ones that's the fiscal agent for the coalition. Um, we know in reality, a lot of times it's the staff that does most of the work and tries to pull members in. It's not the way it's supposed to be, but I know that a lot of coalitions people are like, well, what do you mean staff doesn't do a lot of the work? Yeah, we do. We're not supposed to, but sometimes that's how it ends up. Um, so if they ask about members, they're the people from the different sectors who are part of the coalition. All right. Again, one of the things that we need to think about when we're looking at capacity with coalition members is, are there things people need to learn? And I know Christy took a step away, but Christy's working with You Thrive with Amy Hamilton, and they do a lot of the training opportunities for coalitions. So these are some of the things, and again, this is one of those that they've pulled out as a test question. They might look at how smoothly is your coalition functioning internally. So things like, do people even know how in the world to function as a group? We assume people know how to do meetings, but there's a lot of people that don't. We assume people know how to evaluate, but a lot of people don't. So that may be a opportunity to build up that coalition or that capacity. Are they excited and actively engaged in the work? And if they're not, why? Is it because they don't understand why it would happen, why it needs to happen? Is it because they don't understand the problem? That's where you can. Uh, I know you were listening, Christy, always listening. Um, Maybe you need to do some training on how to run a meeting efficiently or how to communicate. Uh, the Suicide Coalition in Warren County is struggling a little bit with um, tasks and maintaining leadership. So we've been talking about things they can do. Um, is it distributed among members and teams effectively? So again, we don't want one person doing all the work. And I know sometimes the person who is paid to kind of facilitate the coalition feels like, oh, I feel like I should do everything because I'm getting the money. But that's not how it should happen in an ideal world. Um, is everybody keeping it on track? So, not going off into other areas. So that might be a training need. Um, are is diversity respected and even created? Um, how strong are your coalition's external connections with the community? So, if we're a coalition here, do we have connections with people outside? And if not, what do we need to do to improve that? Do you have strategies on how to get the work into the bigger community? Can you identify and bring in additional partners? You know, you might have somebody who says, you know what? I know somebody who works in Girl Scouts who might be really interested in working on this. Fabulous. Um, and then does your coalition make sure that proposed strategies are culturally competent? So these are all things that you could look at and say, hey, you know what? We need to do some training in these areas. So for a test question, um, it might be if you did a training on creating efficient meetings and keeping them task oriented, which phase of the SPIF would that be? And you have to think, okay, if we're talking about training the coalition, that's capacity. If we're talking about training the community, that would be implementation. Does that make sense? The difference there? Okay. All right. Do you remember last week when we talked about the 7 strategies for community change? Kind of. That's okay, because we are going to watch a video that's going to be very um, real life. Um, so this video is about a coalition here in Ohio and what they did. So we're going to just watch the video and then we're going to walk through each one of the strategies from the 7 strategies for community change and talk about how they were implemented. Okay. So you don't really have to do anything. If you want to take notes, you can, but you don't have to. But let's watch this and see what you guys can come up with when we look at it.
Southern Ohio's Scioto County became
I'm looking for the volume. Why is it not showing up? We're just gonna, can you guys hear it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I think the volume's on your computer. It's not up at the top.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
became the epicenter of a nation's growing opioid crisis in the early 2000s. Scioto County attained the highest opioid prescription rate in the state. More than 9.5 million painkiller doses were dispensed in 2010, or more than 120 pills per citizen. The Ohio Department of Public Health brought together Scioto County officials, health departments, and other sector representatives affected by the opioid epidemic to develop a solution for this problem. Two county health departments encouraged partnerships among local stakeholders, leading to the formation of a community coalition focused on both curtailing the current crisis and preventing youth initiation into non-medical opioid use. The newly formed Scioto County Drug Action Team Alliance participated in CADCA's National Coalition Academy training, where coalition leaders learned about local data collection, collaborative planning, and the development of comprehensive strategies to address substance misuse. Framed by the 7 strategies for community change, the coalition's activities targeted individuals as well as the whole community.
In our county, we can actually see live how many people have presented to the emergency department on a drug-related issue, and that helps us to identify, if we're having a spike in overdoses and if we're seeing improvements and things like that. We recruited within our school systems a person in each school system that would be that youth-led prevention leader in that school system. We really expanded access to naloxone, and I feel pretty good about that because naloxone is really just sort of a household word, very, very normal in our county, and people aren't afraid to use it. We began to expand our addiction treatment facilities. We definitely ramped up access to medication-assisted treatment. We got new providers. We've done trainings with new providers so that we could expand that workforce. And we also began to really expand our prevention. We were also able to get it to the law changed to where you didn't have to be a physician to hand that naloxone to someone. Now anyone can do that as long as you're trained. So that helped a lot. It wasn't necessarily feasible to expect a doctor to go with you every place to these outreach events. So we have that change now. We were actually the first county in the nation to declare a public health emergency over prescription opioids. And at the time, that seemed a little odd, certainly based on the phone calls I got from all over the Associated Press and everybody calling. But, now here we are 8 years later, and we have a national public health emergency related to prescription opioids. So we were just really kind of the canaries in the coal mine in Appalachia in terms of the devastating effects of these drugs. Well, the thing that I learned at the National Academy and the strategies that we learned and the tools that we made there really kind of helped me to hone in on specific data and think very strategically about how to address that problem. Looking at root causes in the community, looking at the big picture. We've had reductions in past 30-day use of alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and the largest decrease we had was in the non-medical use of prescription drugs. We also had reductions across the board in all of the other categories of drugs. And so, we feel like we really did a good job with our youth. Our adolescent prescription, non-medical use of prescription drug rates are actually below the national average. Our prescription drug-related fatalities have declined. We have also seen our hepatitis C rates decline, and we comprehensively address all of those things through other avenues. In coalitions, you're not dealing with just this person or just this set of people. You're dealing with the environment, the entire environment where these people live and how they interact.
All right, so let's look through each one of those strategies and how they did it so you can kind of see a real world example. Anybody from Scioto County? Just checking. All right, so the first strategy is provide information. If you know your CSAP strategies, this is kind of like information dissemination. So they got the data, and they were able to get that data out to the coalition. They got it through their health department, prescription monitoring program. As you can imagine, there was a lot at the time through that prescription monitoring program. So that was the first thing they did, getting the information. Next, they worked on enhancing skills. So they did a countywide educational initiative to start talking. You may have heard of that one, kind of expanded to the whole state to facilitate those conversations. They did youth-led prevention initiatives in the school districts, annual youth-led prevention training, and drug-free workplace trainings. So that's the things they did for enhancing skills. Please stop me if you need a question or something. Providing support. So remember, this is where we're supporting those people who are trying to make healthy choices. So, when we talked earlier, it was things like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, AA meetings, Al-Anon meetings, those kind of things. So what they did is they had their Ohio's first community-based naloxone education and distribution program, and an educational campaign about that, so that we could support people who may need some help with that. I always, or I shouldn't say always, I get pushback sometimes from people who are saying, well, naloxone isn't a prevention because that's for people who are using. So, did I tell you guys about my stepdad and his meds for his kidney stones? I don't think so. I tell this story now all the time. So 8 months ago, he was having problems with kidney stones. I've never had that, knock on wood, but I hear it's extremely painful. So they gave him some opioids. Thomas says, yes, extremely painful. And along with the opioids, because he's 80 years old, they gave him naloxone. He's like, what's this for? And they said, well, in case you take more than you're supposed to, you forget that you took it, you take, the wrong dose, we want you to have this. So that was 100% how naloxone can be used as a prevention strategy. He even asked me, he goes, what the heck am I going to do with this? I said, you're not going to do anything with it. You're going to just keep it right there. And then I talked to mom about what she would need to do. But yeah, that's another way that naloxone can be 100% on the prevention side of things. All right. Next one is the enhancing access or reducing barriers. So again, this is where we want to have, if somebody wants to make a healthy choice, if somebody needs something, it needs to be as easy as we can make it. So they got more treatment facilities and medication assisted treatment. They got new providers so that you didn't have to wait 6, 8 months. And then they increased their prevention efforts so that more people got prevention. So they were trying to really reduce those barriers and enhance the access. Next, they did the change consequences. So they had legislation that allowed for just regular people to carry naloxone. So if, in the past, if Thomas was walking around with naloxone, he might have gotten in trouble for having it. They changed that through legislation to say, no, we want people to be able to have that. They no longer had a fear of arrest if they were going to provide that service. Next one is changing physical design. Now, this one takes a little bit of brain thinking, but they were the first drug-free communities grant. They received their first drug-free communities in a high-intensity drug trafficking area. So was it something physical that you could see at a park, at a store? No. But it changed how that community worked in what they could achieve and get because they changed that physical area. The last one is modify or change policies. So you can see how we could also go back and look at the naloxone one. Also is a little bit of this too, right? So we changed the consequences of carrying naloxone because they changed the policy.
They
Um,
also had a law change too, what she said.
yes. Yeah. 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 So some of them can be a little bit of more than one thing. And that's what we want. We want multiple things together because if you just do one thing, it's not going to be as impactful. Um, so they went to the CADCA Academy. They figured out what strategies to work, and they worked on changing some of those policies. So the reason I show you this video is because there may be a question that says, which of the following is an example of modifying changing policy strategy? Now, they're not going to, I don't think they're going to use this video's examples, but I just want you to kind of expand your mind a little bit to think about what kind of things could be in each of these. Does that make sense? All right. You know they like lists. They like the 7 strategies. So they also like 7 steps of program planning. So as you can see, the capacity kind of dips over. The pedal covers a little bit of planning too. So when we're in capacity, we need to think about planning. Um, don't memorize this list, but understand that when you're planning, it's not just planning. You have to, assess the readiness. So you're going back to looking at the readiness assessment. And again, if people don't even think that XYZ spiders are a problem, if you plan something to immediately attack the problem, it's not going to work. So you have to think about what that community readiness is. What are those risk and protective factors? Because again, if we're not picking the right risk factor, it's going to be an uphill battle. Taking those risk and protective factors and putting them into priorities. Looking at what are those resources. I always say the largest YMCA in the country is in Warren County. And if you don't have the YMCA involved, then you've got a problem. So make sure that you've got when you're doing your capacity that you are looking at some of those types of things. Because then in the planning, you might say, hey, you know what? That YMCA has some great education rooms. Maybe we have the kids go do something and educate the parents in one of the rooms. You select your target population. Again, we're looking at the needs and the capacity to then start. We're just kind of on this pedal, starting looking at planning. Figure out what best practices and guiding principles would be. That would be, we're not going to bring in a crashed car and a hairy tongue poster. We're going to do evidence-based. And then how are we going to evaluate this? Because again, we need to start thinking about evaluation all the way back at the beginning. All right. This next slide is something that is I've seen this on almost every set of questions. There's something about archival indicators. So this is one of those times when we said archival indicators could be another word, could be also archival data. This is why I wanted you to see those words. So anybody have an idea of what archival indicators or archival data is?
Data from the agency that they already collect.
Yeah. I'm not
All the
trying
like
to
archival is like historical, right? So historical,
Yeah.
everything up to this point.
Yeah.
Even if it's the wrong data. Because sometimes
Yes.
if like you're saying, if you pick
Yeah.
the wrong risk factor, we're doing a lot of pivoting as a new nonprofit, right? So
Yeah.
pivot, pivot, pivot. So if you've got picked the wrong risk factor at first, oh well, there's more.
Yeah. Right. So archival data. Think about the archives. Um, what was that movie with Nicolas Cage? The American Treasure. Is that what it's called? You love that one, okay.
Classic.
He goes into that big place, all these archives, all old information, all of the books, and it's just tons of stuff that's there. Couple things about archival data. Um, is it easy to collect? I mean, let's think about it. If you walk into a big room with archival data, it's there, right? You don't have to do something. Now, yeah, it might be tough to find the exact thing you want, but you don't have to ask, surveys in the park. You don't have to do a study. It's already all there. So that may be a question where they ask about, is this easy or not? These are some of the things that might be what they call validated archival indicators. So in other words, these are ones that um, a lot of people might use. So looking at availability, where might you get that data of availability? Or what might you look at to know what availability means?
That's availability of other programs or availability of access
Access
or
to drugs or
to,
alcohol.
I see. Well, you're going to look in like, well, that's going to be,
You might look at how many alcohol licenses are in the community.
oh,
You can look
okay.
that up. Um, Not something I do on a Saturday afternoon, but you can look that up.
I wonder if juvenile court data, like for diversion, folks would have
Yeah,
some of that because they collect like use data when they're doing intake. So that might be
100%. Yeah.
archival data.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of different ways you could attach that track, get that
or
data.
even looking at places that have been cited for
Hmm.
underage drinking.
Yep,
When they keep a record of that, and then you would know how many of them were within this age or how many was within this age. So yeah,
right. Again, this is all data that you can just go look for. You don't have
yeah.
to do a survey. You don't have to um, go sit on the lawn with an iPad. Um, what are some of the laws in your community? Has there been a lot of transitions? Like, has a big employer shut down or come in? Could be either. Um, you know, One of the transitions might also be that there's a new dispensary that has opened.
Mhm. Or
Um,
even looking at how many people or neighborhoods have gone to dry areas, where
yeah,
they have voted that they don't want alcohol sales in their community. And
right,
that also will let you know about availability because it's limited now. You can't
right.
actually go here.
Yeah, exactly. So you're just gathering this information. Um, Looking at whether the neighborhood has any kind of organization. Are there already other coalitions that are working together on other issues? Or does nobody even care about each other? Has there been some extreme economic or social deprivation? Those places moving out. Um, is there a lot of family management problems? Again, you can look at juvenile court records, you can look at children's services records. Has there been a lot of family conflict? Looking at um, domestic violence court. What has been the past data that has been collected about parent attitudes? Look at the schools and ask, do parents come in for meetings? What is your parent teacher organization like? Um, yeah, truancy data. Absolutely. Um, early and persistent antisocial behavior. This is where you've got to got to buddy up with your schools to really say, hey, I need this data. So, how many kids are being sent to the office? Academic failure beginning in late elementary. Just look at what the failure rates are like. Um, alienation and rebelliousness. So again, going back to truancy, to juvenile court, to office referrals. Kids who have friends who engage in the problem behavior, favorable attitudes towards it, early initiation. So all of these are ways that you can pull data together. And if you think about this would be a way that you could get that data during an assessment and capacity period, which you could then use for evaluation later. So you may look at early and persistent antisocial behavior. Let's look and see what it was like from the year 2020 to today. That's archival data. At the end of your project, your program, your strategy, you can look at it again and compare it to that archival data. Does that make sense? So just thinking about archival data is just stuff that's already out there. All right, let's look at a few sample questions. A needs assessment that uses information collected from interviews, focus groups, and/or observations involving document reviews to produce a descriptive report is called. So what are some things you see in this question? What are some things that might jump out at you?
The interviews, focus groups, observations, that's going to
Okay.
be like qualitative data.
Mhm. Yep. Christy, was there something else?
No,
Okay. You just unmuted. I was just checking.
I did.
All right.
She got it.
So I would definitely hone in on this that they're asking about interviews, focus groups, and observations. Basically, that's talking to people. So talking to people, getting a descriptive report is not numbers and measurements. It's stories, right? So we're probably looking at qualitative data. Now, if you're like me, you guys are probably way smarter than me, but I always still to this day have to think qualitative quality. It's the quality of the story as opposed to quantitative is quantity like numbers. I have to, just like I have to sing Fred Rogers' song to spell friends. It's just that's how I am. Thomas.
So I just wanted to give something too that I use for qualitative and quantitative. The N is for numbers, the L is for language.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever works for you. So we already kind of have said we're going to look at maybe something qualitative like. So let's look at the answers, possible answers. Oh, but do we want to jump on this answer? Because that's what I would do. We want to hold off. We're thinking, yeah, that's probably it. But let's make sure we read all the answers first because this is what trips me up. Outcome data, quantitative data, or indicator data. So one of the things they always say is see if there's two answers that are kind of opposites. So quantitative data and qualitative data are kind of opposites, right? Then it's usually one of those. Well, we had already said that we were pretty sure this was about qualitative data. But please always read all the answers. Please, please, please. All right. Does that make sense how we got there?
I also like how every time you go through a question like this with us, you pick out what's important in the question, but then you evaluate every answer, even though we may have very quickly gotten to something, because sometimes there's more than one right answer and it's about the best. And that's really the hardest part.
It is. It is. I don't use this word. I hate when they say the best or the most or, oh, It just that already puts me on edge when I see that. So something like the most important feature in creating a logic model. So we know a logic model. What is the basic idea of what is a logic model? Anybody know what they say, what the basic definition of a logic model? It's just a picture of how things are supposed to work.
I think of it like a map.
Yeah. Yeah. That actually might be a really good thought on this one. So when we're thinking about a map, we're thinking about a logic model. What's the most important thing about that?
Like the way things are connected. So how do you connect each step through the process? Like your outcomes, what are those connected to?
Because if you got a map, you want to know how to get to point A, B, C, D to our final destination, right? So really the important feature is connecting all the way through the process. So let's look here. They try out multiple strategies. Is that the purpose or a feature of a logic model? No. You may have logic, different logic models, but that's not what a logic model is supposed to do. Does it enhance community involvement? I mean, it could if people looked at it and were like, oh, that's interesting. Is that the most important feature? They help you determine appropriate staffing patterns. I mean, that's something that might happen with a logic model, but is that the most important feature? That's like one small little section. You might say, oh, I see we say we're going to do 50 life skills classes, so we probably need the right number of people to do that. That's not the most important feature. They connect your outcomes and your goals. And I see a lot of nodding heads. Yeah. So that's how you have to read through that one. Does that make sense? Okay. Last one here. Archival data is. So what did we say archival data is?
The data that's already there, that's already been collected over time.
Yeah, exactly. So let's look at our answers and see which one might be. Information from a large number of individuals. I mean, I like how I've got some faces because could it be? Yeah, it could be. But is it always? And this is how they're going to get you in some ways. It's not that they're trying to trick you. Well, maybe they are trying to trick you, but it's more that you have to really think about it. Yeah, archival data might be information from a large number of individuals, but that's not what all archival data is. Agency compiled information. I don't like how they write this, but okay, is your agency compiling information when they're looking at archival data? Yeah, so let's keep that on the back burner. Hard to find. Is some archival data hard to find? Maybe some of it is. Is all of it hard to find? No. So that's another one where you might say, well, I had a hard time finding that number. Well, that's not what it is about all archival data. Collected from surveys. Yes, some archival data might be, but is all archival data collected from surveys? No. So the only one that's true about everything is that your agency, your coalition, whatever, is going to compile the information. Does that make sense? Because this is one I've seen on a lot of practice questions. All right. So I'm going to send out again a the full, if you want to read a couple weeks ahead, This next one is kind of the guts of the SPIF, planning, implementation, evaluation. You have 2 weeks. I expect you to read these and know these. Or at least, read through them. I'll also send you a couple Cahoots if you want to try those. We've I'll send you Cram again if you want to play around with that. Um, have I sent you guys? So I think I did, but just in case. Um, I have an Amazon list of course, it's being slow right now, of the documents that you can't just, here it is, that you can't just find online. If you wanted, I'm not telling you you have to buy these, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know that anybody ever has. But if you want to look through any of these, or if any of these are of interest to you, um, some of them are stinking expensive. I mean, $55 for a book. Don't do that. I think this one I think was another one that was expensive. Oh no, it's not. Maybe it was a different one. There's one that's like $100 or something ridiculous. Um, yes, yes. So I'll send out that the practice test again, but I think there's a bank of 150 questions, and so it changes it up. Um, Again, do do where you put yourself on a 30-minute timer for 50 questions. That's going to be less time than you'll have at the test. So if you can do it in 30 minutes, it's even better. In these 2 weeks, if you do it and there's a question you're like, that doesn't make sense why that answer is that answer, send it to me. Because I won't say who said it, but we'll go over it to have that discussion about it. Anything else that you need from me? I would love to say that I'll be thinking about you in Cabo, but I won't. So sorry. No, actually, I probably will because I'm a dork
We
like that.
we expect a picture and a song when you return. Yeah, we do.
Absolutely.
Okay, there you go.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
I where is it? I was just I'm just gonna leave this on. Um, where to go? Shoot. I'm doing something on Canva, but this is from when we were in Punta Cana. So,
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Da, 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 da. Yeah.
And this shirt says I sang on I Hate Myself with Rick Springfield. So many moons ago, he had a call out to fans that we could send in a video of ourselves singing this I Hate Myself line. And my name is actually in the CD as a contributor. There's about 200 of us. So anyways. All right. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for interacting. That's very helpful. And it will be helpful for you.
Have fun. We'll see you in a few
Have
weeks.
fun.
Bye,
Have a
guys.
ball.